Hey everybody, it's Mr. Gregory. This is our next lesson. I just wanted to say what a great job you guys did with the last lesson. I really enjoyed reading your answers. I thought that was really great. This next lesson, the question is, why did Americans in the 1830s support Indian removal? So a little bit of context. We just talked about a slave rebellion with Nat Turner. Indian removal is something that's been tied to the entire history of white Europeans coming to the New World. It's not like Indian removal started in the 1830s, and it's not like that would be the last time we would remove Indians. It's something that is just tied to our history here. We haven't ever treated Native Americans well. And the 1830s are an interesting time period because in the late 1820s, there's going to be a lot of sentiment to remove Native Americans from their land. And in the 1830s, we actually do it. And the most famous example of this is something called the Trail of Tears, in which we're going to ask 5 different nations. Well, I say ask, we're going to force 5 different nations to move from the southeast of the United States to Oklahoma. And if they don't do it, we're going to stick a gun in their face and force them. And so those Native Americans marched for hundreds of miles, a lot of them dying of sickness. I believe over 4,000 died on the journey. And in that migration, they're going to die from disease, they're going to die from exhaustion, thirst. It's not going to be a good situation. And the American government is going to oversee this genocide. But the thing is, while this genocide was going on, nobody in the United States, outside of maybe a few people of color, was crying about this. Nobody was upset about it. The only people who seemed to be upset were Native Americans. It was extremely popular to commit the Trail of Tears, to do that act, to move Native Americans away from the Southeast and to Oklahoma. So what I want to know is why. Why was it such a popular thing to do? I'm going to go over that in this video. You don't have to do additional research. It's all right here. It's all in the documents that I gave you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to our timeline here. Let me just read it through you and explain a few things to you. So 1785. So we're going back to before the Constitution, but after the American Revolution. Excuse me. The first treaty between the Cherokee and United States established peaceful relations. Okay. 1796, George Washington initiated the civilization program among Cherokees. I like that word, initiated. That means started. The civilization program, meaning that George Washington thought that the Cherokees were uncivilized. They were a big nation. So we, whites, in the United States and the United States government had to civilize them. So that's what they're talking about there. 1802, Georgia, that's the state of Georgia, ceded some of its western land to the United States. Now, ceded is a really key word there. That means to give away. So Georgia gave away some of its western land to the United States. The U.S. government, in exchange, promised to purchase for Georgia all of the Indian lands remaining within the state. However, the federal government could only buy land through treaty. So basically what this means is Georgia's giving some federal land over to the federal government. If you ever go to a national park, that's federal land. That doesn't belong to the state. But Georgia wants to get the Native American land that's there, and the federal government can only do that if they make a treaty with the Native Americans. So they're limited in what they can do. And a treaty is like an agreement. You know, at the end of the war, there's an agreement. Hey, we agree to stop fighting, and here's what we'll do. A treaty, in this instance, is the same thing. It's just an agreement. 1808 to 1810, first major Cherokee migration to land west of the Mississippi. So Cherokee do start moving out into the west during that time. 1820s. Cherokees became the most, quote, civilized of the civilized tribes: Creeks, Chickasaw, Seminole, Choctaw, and Cherokee. The Cherokee had a newspaper, and many had converted to Christianity. They adopted a constitution. They had farms, and they owned slaves. Okay, so this is interesting. In the eyes of the American government, the Cherokee were now the most, quote, civilized. So in the 25 years since Washington started that program, now they're considered civilized. But take a look there. It says that they had a newspaper. Okay, so they're communicating with each other in a way that whites deem respectable. Not to say the Cherokee weren't communicating with each other before, but having a newspaper was considered more modern. They had converted to Christianity. Hey, in the eyes of the United States government, that was a big plus. And they adopted a constitution. Okay. They had farms and they owned slaves. So it sounds like the Cherokee here are trying to be like white Americans, like Jefferson and Washington. They're doing what they suggested. Is that going to be enough? Well, we'll see. In 1828, Andrew Jackson is elected president, and he declares his support for removal. Now that's interesting because Andrew Jackson really gets elected president because he's good at getting rid of Native Americans. I mean, he is going to slaughter Native Americans before he's president, and he's going to do it while he's president. And he says, yep, I support removing Native Americans. Keep reading. 1828, Georgia extended its state power over the Cherokee Nation and nullified, meaning make illegal, Cherokee law. So Georgia says, we're in charge, your Native American laws, they don't mean anything, you have to do what we say. Okay, now this is really important. 1832, the Cherokee won their case in Worcester v. Georgia. The United States Supreme Court upheld Cherokee sovereignty in Georgia, but Andrew Jackson ignored the ruling. Let me explain what that means to you. Basically, the Supreme Court says the Cherokee have a right to their land, and the U.S. government, nor the state of Georgia, they don't have any control over them, and they can't just take their land. So the Supreme Court of the United States agreed with the Cherokee that they were sovereign, meaning independent, and that they could keep that land. Andrew Jackson's going to say, the Supreme Court has made their decision, now let them enforce it. Well, that's not really how it works. The president is supposed to enforce what the Supreme Court does. It's really bad that Andrew Jackson just ignores what the Supreme Court said to do. It's not what a good president would do. So basically, even though the Cherokee get this win, it doesn't matter. It just leads to nothing. 1836, the Treaty of New Echota was signed, provided for removal of Cherokees to land west of the Mississippi. Chief John Ross led 15,000 in protesting the treaty, and only 2,000 Cherokee agreed to migrate voluntarily. Okay, so a treaty is signed with the U.S. government and the Cherokees, and it said that the Cherokees would move to land west of the Mississippi River. But the chief, John Ross, protests this. He says, I didn't sign this. I didn't agree to this. I don't agree. So only 2,000 Cherokee agree to voluntarily migrate. That leads me with a lot of questions. Why would somebody in the Cherokee Nation sign this treaty if they didn't want to move? All right, we'll get back to that. 1838, the U.S. government sent 7,000 troops who forced the Cherokees out at bayonet point. 4,000 people died of cold, hunger, and disease on their way to the western lands. Yeah, that's the Trail of Tears. 7,000 troops stick their rifles and their muskets in the face of those 5 Native American groups, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Seminole, all that, and they say, move, leave. Leave or we'll kill you. And what happens? They die of cold, hunger, and disease on the way there. And that's something that I hope you never have to live through in your life. You know, we're pretty comfortable, all things considered. Nobody's telling us we have to get up and move. Usually people move voluntarily. This was not voluntary. And people died from it. So just, remember that. 1839, the execution of Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot for their role in the Treaty of New Echota. Oh, that's interesting. These 3 people are executed for that treaty we were just talking about. All right, so when you look at all this, you see Native Americans trying to do what Jefferson and Washington advised, to be civilized, to do what white people want. But at the end of the day, the American government, the state of Georgia, they want that Native American land, and they're not going to be happy until they have it. And so it didn't matter what Native Americans did. The whites in the United States government and in Georgia wanted that land, kicked them out of it, and then people died as a result, which is genocide. I mean, that is literally taking land from a group of people and then they die and it's because of you. That's genocide. You're responsible for that. So when I say you, I mean the American government, not you. So our question is, why were people cool with this? Why did Americans in the 1830s support Indian removal? Why would anybody be all right with this? Well, let's find out. Let's go to our first document, Document A, Andrew Jackson. If you go to the bottom, this is his State of the Union speech from December 30th, 1830. So he's been in office for about a year now, a year or so. And he is giving the State of the Union to Congress. Every year the president is supposed to report to Congress and tell Congress how how the country's doing. We usually televise that now, but there were no TVs at this time. So let's see what Andrew Jackson says. Pay attention to anything that might help us answer the question. Why did Americans in the 1830s support Indian removal? This is Andrew Jackson. This is the man that the American people overwhelmingly voted to be president in 1828. So he I don't think he speaks for all the people, but he certainly speaks for a lot of the people. So let's see what he has to say. It gives me great pleasure to announce to Congress that the government's benevolent policy of Indian removal has almost been achieved. Now, he calls the policy of removing Indians benevolent. That means kind. That just seems like a total contradiction to me. How can you take people from their homes and call it kind? Let's see what he says. We have wept over the fate of the natives of this country. As one by one, many tribes have disappeared from the earth. However, we must accept this the way that we accept when an older generation dies and makes room for the younger. We would not want to see this continent restored to the condition in which our forefathers found it. What good man would prefer a country covered with forests and occupied by a few thousand savages to our great republic, studded with cities, towns, and prosperous farms decorated with art and industry, occupied by more than 12 million happy people, and filled with all the blessings of liberty, civilization, and religion. Okay, so that second paragraph is interesting. First, before that, he says, it's a real shame that, Native Americans are dying, but hey, it's part of life. All right, whatever. But in that next paragraph, he says, who wants to go back to what this continent looked like when it was all Native Americans? And by the way, he calls them savages. He says, it's a country covered with forests and occupied by a few thousand savages. Who would prefer that to our great republic? We've got cities, towns, farms, art, industry, 12 million happy people, liberty, civilization, and religion. Well, I mean, this is incredibly racist, because he views the Native Americans as savages who do nothing, and he views white society, with all the things that he mentions, as superior. That's racism. That's white supremacy. He's not hiding it. So why did Americans support Indian removal? It's clear that Andrew Jackson thought white people were superior to these Native Americans that he refers to as savages. Keep reading. The United States will pay to send the natives to land where they may live longer and possibly survive as a people. Well, he says, yeah, we're going to pay to send the Native Americans there. Yeah, you're going to pay the soldiers to stick guns in their face. And he says, they're going to live longer and possibly survive. The only threat to them is you. You, because you want their land, and you're going to stick a gun in their face and make them leave. So, that's like saying, I'm going to save you from yourself, but I'm the only threat to you. It's ridiculous. Keep reading. Can it be cruel when this government offers to purchase the Indian's land, give him new and extensive territory, pay the expense of his removal, and support him for the first year in his new home? How many thousands of our own people would gladly embrace this opportunity of moving west under such conditions? Well, he says, Jackson's saying it's not cruel because guess what? We're buying their land, we're giving them new territory, we're paying them for the removal, and we're going to give them the first year on the house for free. Well, they don't have a choice. And if they don't have a choice and you do all that, it's still cruel. And then he says, we're giving them new and expensive territory. No, we weren't. We were giving them really poor farmland in Oklahoma. We weren't giving them good farmland. We weren't giving them better territory. Most of these Native American tribes wanted to live near water where the land was fertile and they could grow things, and they had established a civilization there. And we went, no, we're taking that. Here, you can move to a dirt field in Oklahoma. So, Jackson is really selling it here and making it sound like he's giving them this great thing when he's really not. Okay? Last paragraph, the policy of the government towards the red man is generous. Now, we do not call Native Americans the red man or reds or certainly not redskins. That's like a racial slur. At the time, they used the term red man to refer to Native Americans, but please do not do that. It's very offensive. He says the way the government is treating Native Americans is generous. Well, I've just gone over all the reasons that it's actually not generous. He's just selling it that way. Keep reading. The Indian is unwilling to follow the laws of the states and mingle with the population. Well, how are they unwilling to follow the laws of the United States? I don't understand. What did they do? They won't just give the United States government their land? That's disobeying the law? Come on, that's ridiculous. It says they don't mingle with the population. That really annoys me because you hear this a lot about immigrants, right? Oh, immigrants, they don't want to assimilate. They want to do their own thing. Okay, so they have every right to. Mexicans, which, by the way, you all live in what used to be Mexico. This used to be Mexico. Mexicans come to what is now this country, and they practice the same religion, and they do a lot of the same things, that a lot of white people do in practicing Christianity and having a lot of the same traditions and things like that. But at the end of the day, they speak a different language and aren't considered white, so therefore racists are terrible to them and consider them less. So, Jackson can lie and say, oh yeah, well they don't want to mingle with the population. That doesn't actually matter to you, because look at all the Mexican immigrants that we have that do mingle with the population, and people are still racist to them. People are still terrible to them. So I'm not buying when Jackson says, oh, they don't want to assimilate. So this is just an incredibly racist thing that Jackson's saying, but I need to get through it, so I'm sorry, I'll keep reading. Last part, to save him from utter annihilation. When he says him, I assume he's referring to Native Americans, and annihilation means destruction. So to save the Native Americans from destruction, the government kindly offers them, a new home and proposes to pay the whole expense of his removal and settlement. Guys, this is Jackson selling you a bill of goods, selling the American people a bill of goods. No, we're being nice to them. We're being nice to them. We're getting rid of their land and giving it to ourselves, and we're making them move somewhere else, and it's nice, and we're going to pay for the whole thing. Well, I don't care how much money you pay me. If I die of cold, hunger, and disease, any one of those reasons on the Trail of Tears, I don't care how much you pay, or I don't care how benevolent you think the policy is. I still wind up dead. I still wind up without my home. So, according to this document, why were Americans supportive of Indian removal? Well, one, their president is telling them, no big deal, we're being good to them. And I think a lot of Americans believed that. I think a lot of Americans believed that the government was doing something good for the Native Americans. And number two is, even if you didn't believe that, the president believes that Native Americans were inferior to white people. So, and the people voted him in, so they probably share those values. So Americans were racist enough to believe it, and were foolish enough to think, because their president told them to, that they were actually being generous to the Native Americans. So, not a good situation here. Really, really ugly language. And Jackson is trying to sound civilized and, like he's a good person here. But really, he's just being a complete jerk. So, let's go to document B, which is our last document, and let's find out any other reasons we can for why why Americans supported Indian removal in the 1830s. So this is a letter from Elias Boudinot. You might recognize that name from our timeline. Elias Boudinot was a Cherokee. If you go to the bottom, the letter above was written in 1837, that's 1 year before they were removed, by Elias Boudinot, a Cherokee who supported Indian removal and signed the Treaty of New Echota that gave away Cherokee land. Okay, so this is the guy who sold out the Cherokees. He's the one who signed the treaty. Remember, it wasn't the chief. The letter is to Chief John Ross, the leader of the Cherokees who opposed Indian removal. So Boudinot is going to sign this treaty, and then that's going to give away the land to the United States government. And then now he's writing a letter to Chief John Ross, who was actually in charge. I'm assuming that Boudinot is going to say to John Ross, hey, this is why we should give the United States government our land. That's a guess, but let's see what he actually says. Remember, this is from the perspective of a Cherokee who basically sold out his own people. Look at our people. They are wretched. Look, my dear sir, around you, and see the progress that vice and immorality have already made. See the misery. If the darker picture, which I have described here, is a true one, can we see a brighter possibility ahead in another country? And under other circumstances, there is a better prospect. Okay, I just want to stop here. So he says, hey, everything is terrible around here. He says it's wretched. Wretched meaning miserable. He says, look around, see the misery. Look what progress that vice, meaning sin, have done to us. In other words, the Cherokee are living in sin. They're not doing good things, and where they live is just absolutely awful. But he says there is a better prospect, meaning a better possibility. Okay, keep reading with me in the second paragraph. Removal, then, is the only remedy, the only practical remedy. Our people may finally rise from the very ashes to become prosperous and happy, and a credit to our race. I would say to my countrymen, fly from your life, here that is destroying our nation. Wow. So Boudinot thinks things are so bad that, the Cherokee are in their ashes. But if they remove themselves and go somewhere else, they can rise up from those ashes and be prosperous and happy. Doesn't this sound like a white person wrote this? Like, this does not sound like a Cherokee. But he's saying things are so bad in the Cherokee Nation that they need to leave. That's the only way to make things better. Okay. Keep reading, last paragraph. He's talking to John Ross, what is your plan of relief? It is dark and gloomy beyond description. You want the Cherokee to live according to the laws of Georgia, no matter how unfair they are? Instead of fix the evil, you would tie our people down in the chains of slavery. Okay, so he's saying, you, John Ross, you don't have a plan. You'd rather stick around here, and it's practically slavery. You're keeping our people back. That's quite the accusation to make against the chief of your tribe. Keep reading. The final destiny of our race under such circumstances is too revolting to think of, meaning too disgusting or horrible to think of. Take my word, it is the sure end of our race if you succeed in preventing the removal of our people. There will come a time when there will be few of us left as reminders of this brave and noble race. May God protect us from such a destiny. Okay, so he's saying, if you don't allow us to be removed and go to Oklahoma, the Cherokee, as we know it, that's the end of our race. We're going to be wiped out. And he's not talking about being wiped out by the American government. He's talking about just being wiped out by the state that they're in. So if you asked Elias Boudinot, why did Americans support Indian removal, he'll tell you as a Cherokee, because living on Cherokee land at this time in the 1830s was terrible. And, the Cherokee were on their last legs, and they were going to, they weren't going to survive the way things were. If they kept on that path, they weren't going to survive. Their only choice was to take the government's deal and move to Oklahoma. I'm not sure I agree with Boudinot. I didn't live on that Cherokee reservation, but I can tell you this. Only 2,000 Cherokee out of, thousands agree to migrate voluntarily. Chief John Ross has 15,000 with him that protest this. So that tells me that Boudinot is in the minority here. Most Cherokee don't want to leave. And so I don't know how accurate what Boudinot is saying, or how Boudinot, I don't know how accurate what he's saying, or let me rephrase. I don't know how accurate Boudinot's words are. He seems to be in the minority here. So here's what I want you to do. Take a look at Jackson, use a quote from Jackson for evidence, and then use a quote from Boudinot, A and B, put that in your answer, and in 14 to 20 sentences, tell me why did Americans support Indian removal, and give some reasons. You guys did such a great job last time. I know there's not as much information in this one, but this is a pretty simple answer. Don't worry so much about the sentence limit. Just worry about answering the question. Please do not go online and just Google the question and try and just copy and paste. I won't accept that. You guys can't do that in middle school, high school, college, grad school, any of that. So it's not going to fly. If you're struggling, by all means, come talk to me, but whether via email or on our Zoom calls, but use the information here. The information here is more than enough to answer this question sufficiently. All right? I look forward to reading your answers, and I will see you guys on Friday when we have our virtual class. Okay? See you later, guys.